Tonight we greet, with prayers of thanksgiving, the official news that an armistice was signed almost an hour ago in Korea. With special feelings of sorrow and of solemn gratitude, we think of those who were called upon to lay down their lives in that far-off land to prove once again that only courage and sacrifice can keep freedom alive upon the earth.
Dwight D. Eisenhower announcing, of course, the Korean armistice, the 60th anniversary of that on Saturday, and there will be events, of course, commemorating this in Washington, D.C. at the Korean War Memorial. And we were going back, and I have a special interest in Korea for a lot of reasons, but we all should have a special interest in this. And I was looking back on some of the comments from Korean War veterans, and think of it, the fact that you go and you fight in this war that was vicious and so difficult and so ultimately important to the security of what would be a free people and critical to the balance of powers, all of this, and people end up telling you it's a forgotten war.
Look at what the hell happened. It's the forgotten war.
How does it make you feel to hear that phrase, the forgotten war?
Well, like crap. I mean, it's a forgotten war. Why is it forgotten? How about all these guys that died over there?
And in fact, I decided that, look, when something like this anniversary comes up, you have to go right to the source of knowledge and insight. And one of the few people, I think, who've really devoted enough energy and focus to this is Victor Davis Hanson. And, of course, his book, The Savior Generals, How 5 Great Generals Saved Wars That Were Lost from Ancient Greece to Iraq. Of course, he knows and has written extensively about the Korean War, and we'll also talk to him about this illegal alien crime wave, which is being covered up by the American media, and we'll talk to him about that as well. But first, on this armistice anniversary, VDH, great to talk to you. How are you, sir?
Good morning. Great to talk to you, Laura.
Let's talk about why Korea remains so critical today to our security, to the regional balance of powers, especially given the rise of China. Because I think a lot of people, their eyes are focused on the Middle East and forget the importance of the Korean Peninsula and ultimately how critical this war really was.
Well, we have 4 or 5 countries there that are both now have evolved into being democratic, open markets, and are great contributors to the world economy. I mean, think of everything from Hyundai to Kia to Samsung. So Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and South Korea are successful, humane societies that contribute enormously to the world's prosperity, humanity, and they are not nuclear, and they're not able to defend themselves given the rough neighborhood that they find themselves in. And we made a decision in 1950 to 53 that we would not allow North Korea and the Chinese communists, along with Russian help, to do to South Korea what it has done to North Korea. So the reason that we have a Kia today, or that there's a humane society in South Korea versus the alternative in North Korea, is because 36,000 Americans died over there, along with over 1 million Koreans, to offer an alternative. And there was times, whether it was June 1950, when there was a sudden invasion, we were all the way down to Pusan, or after the collapse at the Yalu River under MacArthur, when we had the longest military retreat in American history. By December of 1950, there was very little chance that most Americans thought we could save South Korea. But mostly South Korea exists today largely because of one man, Matthew Ridgeway, who came in December 1950, and in 100 days not only saved and restored South Korea, but was able to get across the 38th parallel and to be in a situation where we have this negotiated armistice today.
Well, yeah, and your point about Ridgeway, and he's one of your savior generals in your book. I mean, I guess my view on Ridgeway is like he was a great manager and a great logistics man. He was an amazing morale booster. He was good in the field, but doesn't it stand, and I'm going to take issue with you a little bit, that MacArthur and Incheon saved Korea? I mean, that saved Korea, did it not?
It did. That was the prior September, but the problem with that is that MacArthur was the savior general of Korea, and he almost lost it. He would have lost it because after going into Incheon, he didn't have enough troops to go north, and he insisted on going past the 39th parallel, which was defensible, on a 400-mile chase up to the Yalu River. And the problem with that is the Korean Peninsula, as you know, widens. It was the end of the year. It gets very cold. It's very mountainous. And there were 400,000 Chinese troops massing on the border with Soviet logistical help. He did not have air superiority, so he was cautioned again and again, be careful if you go that far north without taking adequate precautions, and he didn't. And then he almost had I don't want to say a mental breakdown, but when the Chinese came across the border, and that was that 400-mile bloodbath of Americans, he never spent one night in Korea. He was in Tokyo. He was 70 years old. Mm-hmm. And he just had a crisis of confidence. And then when Ridgeway came, because General Walker had been killed in an accident, he was in an impossible situation because MacArthur both had some legitimate argument that people in the State Department either had been treacherous or didn't support him, but every time Ridgeway started to do well and recover, then it almost made his arguments less persuasive. How could we recover Korea when people in the State Department are trying to undermine it?
But wasn't it also, though, Victor Davis Hanson, MacArthur was demonized, right, in talking about the nuclear threat that the region posed, and that the demonizing of that claim that there could be a big nuclear problem here, that was kind of trumped up to ultimately bring in the end of the war, right? We're going to end this thing, even though he said...
Well, the person who did that, though, wasn't MacArthur. It was after he was relieved. It was Dwight Eisenhower, who, remember, didn't come into January of 1953.
Right, Dwight Eisenhower, excuse me.
Yeah, and the reason he did, I mean, all the people who love Eisenhower and say he's not a Reagan or he's not a Bush, he's sober, they misread what he said. He basically came in and deliberately raised the possibility of using nuclear weapons. To get a strategic impasse with the Soviet Union, and China wasn't nuclear then. But I guess some things that are forgotten is that in that recovery, it's pretty gruesome to read, but what Ridgeway did is he achieved air superiority with the new F-86 that allowed the B-29s to come in and drop napalm. He created a series of fixed positions, and he killed or caused almost 500,000 Chinese communist casualties, and he pretty much destroyed the Chinese army for the next year, and he wiped out the North Korean army. And you can argue maybe we could have gone across the 38th parallel at that point, as some people advocated.
Well, we're going to go back and forth on MacArthur and Ridgeway, but when you look back on the of course most famous line of MacArthur's, "There's no substitute for victory." Think about that line. There is no substitute for victory today in 2013 with Korea being where it stands today. I mean, an incredibly insightful comment. There is no substitute for victory. So what do we make of that now, given our situation still with North Korea?
Thing that everybody is worried about with all those countries is that they're such important countries to the world, and they could make nuclear weapons like Toyotas, you know that, and they would work on like the North Koreans sometimes don't. But the reason that South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, maybe even the Philippines do not go nuclear is that they have their trust in the United States, especially against the new Chinese threat. And when the president says he's unilaterally, and that's what it basically is, and who cares about the Russians do? They don't have these clients anymore. But when he says that he's going to build down to 1,500, even some people say 800 deployable weapons, those countries interpret that a very different way. They feel, we're not inside. They don't have enough weapons now to include us in the nuclear umbrella. We've got to do certain things for our own security. And what he's doing is he's creating the environment for either the nuclearization of the Sea of Japan or some type of confrontation from China, because China looks at this not as magnanimity, but weakness. So I'm terrified that this president's going to talk with all these Nobel Prize utopian bromides, and the end result of it will be when he leaves office, We either have 3 nuclear powers facing China, or we have China basically using proxies in a conventional war.
When we come back, Victor Davis Hanson is going to stay with us. An incredibly important war. We had 33,000 plus Americans died. It was the largest civilian casualty rate, I believe, if I'm not getting this wrong, Victor, in world history of wars, right? The largest civilian casualty rate. Is that correct?
It's very disputed, but people have argued there may have been 2 million Koreans killed. I mean, it didn't compare with the Eastern Front in World War II, but for a so-called police action.
Well, forgotten war. It's pretty for something called the Forgotten War.
Absolutely.
When we had the casualty levels, the United States alone was almost 34,000 dead. So we'll take a break.
Yeah, the United States lost 700 people killed in one day on the retreat back to the 38th parallel. One day, and 15,000 casualties in 30 days, more than the Iraq and Afghanistan war in 30 days than we lost in 10 years.
We'll take a break. Victor Davis Hanson stays with us, including other topics. The media cover-up of illegal alien crime. Don't go away.
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Like Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. I'm going to have to sing it, okay? Because when we think about today's North Korea, we think about this new leader, Kim Jong-un, who seems to be wearing nothing but Mao jackets, okay? And in Asian culture, appearance is everything. So we had Kim Il-sung. He always wore tailored Western suits. And Kim Jong-il, he always wore those Korean work jumpsuits. And now the son wears the Mao jackets. This is the kind of stuff I'm going to ask Victor Davis Hanson, who's with us. His Savior Generals book includes, of course, Matthew Ridgeway from the Korean War. And Victor Davis Hanson can now opine on whether that means anything. It is kind of interesting when you look back on the way the leaders appeared to the public.
Yes. The thing about Ridgeway was that when people thought that the war was already lost, it was kind of like Petraeus, but with a surge that he not only said that the war wasn't lost, but he decided that the American people needed to think that there was no Chinese Superman, that everybody thought had kind of these stereotype views of red hordes coming across the border with plain bugles and attacking at night and with propaganda tapes as they charge. And Ridgeway basically said, I'm going to put a grenade on one chest and a medical kit on the other. I'm going to get right on the front, and these guys are not Superman. They're 400 miles from their lines just like we were. If we were overextended, why aren't they? And we're going to do to them what they did to us, and just watch me. And it was pretty amazing, the turnaround in mentality based on this image of who he was and how he spoke and how he looked.
Well, to me it seems that I think with Joel Skousen, I think he was in WorldNet Daily, and he said the turn-on event for World War III will not be Iran or the Mideast. The turn-on event for World War III will be maybe after 2020, after a full rearmament, Korea. And he's not the only one saying that this is being overlooked by people who have a singular focus on the Middle East.
Right. How can we ask a proud nation like Japan or South Korea to sit there while somebody sends test missiles into their airspace or threatens them almost on a weekly basis? And Japan is rearming as it never has. China habitually goes into its airspace, into its territorial waters to test us. But what this is really about is that people in that part of the world have read what Barack Obama has said. They've looked at his policy initiatives, and they said this guy either cannot or will not offer the same degree of deterrence in that part of the world as he did. It's sort of 1979, 1980 when we saw the Russians go into Afghanistan, the hostages, the Tehran, the Shah, communists in Central America, China's going into Vietnam. It's the same idea, and people think he either can't or won't stop us. I'm really apprehensive that something's going to happen, either an incursion across the 38th parallel or a missile going over Japan or a Chinese-Japanese confrontation.
Well, look what's happening with the Philippines, Victor. The Philippines now, they're seeing China coming into its waters on a regular basis, and
they're reaching out to us.
Right, and what are we giving them? Nothing.
We're not giving them anything, because I had an interesting visit from a Chinese official not long ago who monitors people like what you and I do. I do it on a lesser scale, but she basically made the argument off the record that she really wanted to know what U.S. policy was all about, because she couldn't really believe ostensibly that we would be so unconcerned with our allies and so reluctant to advance American interests, and she thought this was some kind of plot. Sort of a Zen, Obama was a Zen leader, that he was luring us in.
Well,
and I said, I wish it were, but I'm afraid that what you see is what you get.
Well, or a new globalist world order where ultimately, if things keep going the way they are, it ultimately results in a surrender of American rights and our sovereignty. And it happens in a way that few of the so-called smart people predicted.
And hundreds of millions of people's lives that have been successful in Asia are predicated on U.S. security guarantees. And it's not going to happen, they think. And that means that other things are going to happen, and those other things are going to change the world in ways that aren't going to be nice.
All right, Japan, the Philippines, even Australia, obviously Taiwan, and our great ally in South Korea. Victor Davis Hanson, only you could discuss this in the way that you just did. Thank you so much for joining us.
Me, Laura.
Absolutely. The Savior Generals here on the Laura Ingraham Show. And remember, podcast launches 3 p.m. And goodbye, Chrissy, our great intern. We loved having you with us. Thank you so much. All right, bye.